Today marks the 9th anniversary of the launch of Awakening to Awareness radio show, and I have a special guest to help celebrate that with us in a show segment titled New Media, New Possibilities. So let me tell you a little bit about this show guest. Phyllis Haynes is a 25-year on-air broadcast veteran in network news and public affairs reporting. She served as the host of Straight Talk for WOR TV in New York and reported on major issues for ABC Evening News with Peter Jennings and the #1 morning show Good Morning America. She received awards for her original independent documentary work. The Daily News heralded her independent production of AIDS, The Fact of Life, featuring Susan Sarandon, as a great learning tool. Her documentary received an award from the American Film Institute as well as from Billboard magazine. Phyllis is also recognized for her work in the United States and abroad on cross-cultural communications and new media. We're going to learn lots more about those two terms when we get into the show. She also received a grant through the Soros Foundation and the Hellenic Foundation to design and direct programs in Eastern Europe and Greece on issues of free expression for broadcast journalists. Her successful and impactful presentations on cross-cultural issues brought her as a speaker to audiences of Asian Americans at MIT, New York Asian Chambers of Commerce, Apex, and recent. Through her work as a professional specialist in journalism and documentary production attached to Emerson College in Boston, she collaborated and developed conferences on what is now referred to as the Internet neutrality, and also was appointed to the Board of Scientists and Scholars of the International Society for Panetics, an institution which was devoted to examining and ending the infliction of suffering. Her work now is devoted to helping unsung thought leaders, inventors, and creatives increase their exposure and understand how to use the new media terrain to bring their work to the world. Google recognized Phyllis for her work on YouTube as an important independent contributor, invited her to participate with their YouTube Creators Program, where she was given the tools to expand within the new Google plan for video. She is also a founding board member of the Coach Initiative. And just before I introduce Phyllis and bring her on live, I'm going to mention that new media refers to on-demand access to content anytime, anywhere, on any digital device, as well as interactive user feedback and creative participation. Another aspect of new media is the real-time generation of new and unregulated content. Most technologies described as new media are digital, often having characteristics of being manipulated, networkable, dense, compressible, and interactive. So how's that for a technical explanation? I'm sure Phyllis will make it easier for us to understand. One last statistics, a 2013 report released by Pew Internet Research Project on the demographics of Internet users notes that baby boomers and seniors are steadily increasing their use of the Internet. Not surprising. 77% of those aged 50 to 60 are online, and 54% of those aged 65 and older are using the Internet. So keep that perspective in mind as we welcome to the show the talented and accomplished Phyllis Haynes. Phyllis, are you with us?
I'm with you. I'm thrilled to be with you, Eric. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much. I might just let our listeners know Phyllis is on the East Coast of the United States presently, where they are experiencing some very, very severe weather, lightning, thunderstorms, and whatnot. So we hope that we'll have a good connection. In the event that we have a little bit of a weather interruption here, we'll merely cycle around and pick Phyllis right back up. So don't worry if we lose her temporarily. And of course, Phyllis, don't you worry either.
Yeah, I don't want to get struck by lightning, so I'm using my speakerphone. It is a little intimidating to see all the lightning.
So you were among the first women in broadcast news in a major market, and that market was New York. and one of the first black women. How just for the listening audience, Phyllis, a little bit of a background. How did you actually get into broadcast news?
I was at New York University, and it was the beginning of the anti-war period, and I started to get called into broadcast outlets to comment on student activity on campus. It just was a natural fit for me to go work part-time at a local news station, and I think you know me, Eric, a bit. I volunteer for everything, and so in a short period of time, within a year, I was reporting for WPIX TV in New York, and it never stopped. It still hasn't stopped. But that's how I got started. It was a little tough because women were seen as feature reporters and puff piece reporters. There were a few great ladies right before me. Some of you may remember Marlene Sanders or Liz Trotta, but still there were mostly women were not given the hard edge assignment, and I insisted on not becoming a puff reporter, and that's how my career began. It wasn't easy, but it was worth the effort.
Isn't it always?
No, I think that life is tough for lots of people, and struggle doesn't always bring you a great result. I think I was fortunate, and I'm very, very humbled by the good fortune I've had. I wouldn't make the generalization that all struggle leads to a positive end, no.
No, not absolutely not. And you cite the fact that it was tough then, and it's still tough today in many respects. But I suspect, Phyllis, that one of the reasons that you've stayed with it is because you're passionate about this. Where does the passionate drive come from in you in terms of broadcast news, journalism, and that?
Again, I think that my life took me on a path that saved my life. I found that teachers in the area of what we now call transformation gave me an insight into what life can be. So, for example, there was a lecture I heard by a man named Morty Lefko, and Morty did a simple drawing on the blackboard, which may be obvious to many people. Now, I may sound terribly dumb to some people, but it never occurred to me that success was not a linear journey, but rather one that went up and down. And he drew a oscilloscope kind of drawing where there was high points and low points, and it made a big difference in my life. And so that kind of ignited me to have the discovery that I had to embrace all the challenges in a particular way. And I think that just freed up the passion. I think most human beings have passion, but it gets blocked by not understanding that the challenges do not mean that you're not wonderful. They just mean you get to go to the next level. It's like a board game in a sense.
Yeah.
You don't give up, you just keep going. So I think, in short, transformation freed me up from getting stuck behind barriers that many people don't get the chance to understand.
And
so we're going to talk about new media, or we're going to talk about my life?
We really want to know about you, but yes, we're going to talk about new media. In fact, we're coming up on our first commercial break in about a minute. So I'm merely going to segue into the commercial break with your remark about embracing challenges. And in 60 seconds or so, you used the word transformation twice, Phyllis. Would you mind enlightening, at least in 60 seconds, if that's doable, what transformation means to you?
For me, it means a shift in state. It means that you could be standing in the same place with your eyes open, and all of a sudden you see something that might have been there all along, but you didn't see it before. Now you see it. Now you understand it. And, of course, then you get to do it again. It's a process. There's no single transformation. It's an ongoing effort. But basically, it's seeing something in a new way that shifts your whole being and gets you to move to the next place.
So what we're going to do is we're actually going to see something in a new way as soon as we come back from this commercial break. And Phyllis mentioned that it's a shift in state. So what we're going to do after this break is we're going to shift the focus from Phyllis, even though we'd love to talk more about you. And we actually will at the end of the show. And we're going to learn a little bit more about new media and new possibilities. So stay with us. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back. My engaging guest is Phyllis Haynes, who has a diverse background in broadcast, news, journalism, and media. Just before the break, I was asking Phyllis to share with us her thoughts on what transformation means and is. And part of what she shared with us, for those of you that weren't with us in the first quarter of the show, is it's a shift in state. It has to do with how you see things differently or see things in a different light. So what I'd like to do is shift our conversation into the meat or the substance of our show, which has to do with new media. So the first question back to you, Phyllis, then is what about your experience in the new media realm, if you will, and what about that experience motivated you to become an independent producer?
My experience in mainstream broadcasting would be the primary motivation for being independent. There is much about traditional news coverage, and today particularly the argumentative styles of various organizations, that really made me feel that I didn't want to be part of that kind of configuration, that news was not really coming to people in the way that I hoped it would. I went into the field with being inspired by people like Walter Cronkite and Eric Sevareid and extraordinary people who believed in objectivity and searching for the truth. The industry has turned primarily towards entertainment. Now there are some great people still in it, so I'm not just saying it's all awful. But for the most part, I was disappointed by the narrowness. And I'll give you a specific example. You mentioned the fact that I did a documentary on AIDS. Well, I was a reporter at ABC News at the time that the AIDS crisis really began to hit. And if you remember, everyone was scared because it looked like it was going to be a huge epidemic. It was an epidemic, but it was, we didn't know then what we know now about it. And so I approached ABC about doing an in-depth report, not on the problem of AIDS, but how we could all still function in the world with this epidemic, and how 18-year-old kids, for example, could go to a prom and understand that they could still kiss each other. You know, that this was the kind of thing that was really terrifying lots of young people. But ABC was not interested in taking a risk along those lines. So on my own, I went out and I raised $500,000. I hired a director. I partnered with that director, and we made an extraordinary film that ultimately turned out to be, and still is around, Too Frank for Television. So that, again, motivated me to think about being an independent. But the difference then in the 80s and the early 90s was that the technology was still so expensive and difficult that you couldn't really do what you can do today. Now, if I had that same desire now to do that kind of thing, you have everything at your fingertips. You don't have to go to ABC or NBC and ask for a crew. You don't have to have a sound man, a lighting man, an editor, a cameraman. You can do it yourself. And there is so much technology that makes it easy. So I was driven, and I did raise $500,000, and I could do it, and it's a fabulous film. If anyone really wants to see it, you know, they can email you, and I'll let them take a look at it. I'm doing a short piece right now on new cancer research the steps I would have had to take to get to do the piece I'm doing today, the permissions, the begging, the pleading, the fact that no one else had done it before would have been a big no for me. Now, if I want to do something, I can do it, and there's no one I have to ask. And that, to me, Eric, is the most satisfying and thrilling feeling. There were so many times when I saw something. I don't know if you know the story of Cassandra, but it's often referred to, the Greek tragedy, where Cassandra saw the Greek and Trojan War about to happen and told people to go back, and nobody listened. That was the feeling I had being at ABC Network News. Of course, there were times they listened, but I think I was meant to be an independent. There's no question. I hope that gave you some insight into what drove me to this.
Well, it does, and many of us are grateful that you are a successful independent, because you are bringing to us now, and I'll harken back to what you mentioned earlier, that news wasn't coming to people the way you had hoped it would. So now, with the technology and everything else that comes along with it, in coupling that with being an independent producer, the world is your oyster. There's really no stopping you in terms of what sort of message and what sort of content you want to share with the world. So that begs the perfect question here from me, at least, and that's what is the focus of your work now, and obviously integrating new media technology into what you're doing now. And for the listening audience, which is comprised largely of baby boomers, why might they be interested in doing similar work? It's kind of a three-part question, Phyllis.
Okay, well, there's room for lots of people to do what I'm doing, and I'm happy to share that. There is also enormous responsibility in this, in that you can do anything you want with this medium. You can use the camera for good. You can use the camera for bad. So, again, my motivation is to interview people who are kind of like me, people who have had ideas and views and inventions that maybe they didn't get to the mainstream media in the way they would have liked, and I want to support them now in understanding how to build their own universe, how to get people listening and following them, kind of the way you're doing it, Eric. It's brilliant what you're doing. People think that the only model for media is Oprah. Oprah is fantastic. Oprah was an exception. Oprah is a brilliant woman who had a great idea to own her own show. That may never happen again in quite that way. But there are many other models besides that model for how you can build your own universe of people and nurture that group of people by using all the social media, using a computer to make your own film or audio tapes or podcasts. You can have an exchange where you talk to a colleague, support that colleague, talk about that colleague publicly, and maybe that colleague will then talk about you to his or her database. It's an amazing opportunity. Just as an aside, in the early 80s or late 70s, I heard a lecture from Jonas Salk, who was responsible for the Salk vaccine. But he'd taken up the whole issue of transformation and what was next for science. And his prediction was that beyond all the scientific discoveries, the next greatest thing for human beings was connection. That we were going to find extraordinary ways to connect with each other. Now, this predates all social media. We're all connected now. But he said that there would be a meta leap in consciousness because of this connection. And I believe he was right, because every time I use, for example, if I do a film, like right now I'm doing a piece on two scientists who've come together with some very different technology, and I think they have a handle on really knocking cancer out, and hopefully maybe we'll do another show in a year from now about this. But anyway, when I get a chance to talk to people like this, it's so exciting. It's so enlivening, and just sending out the information gives me a feeling of real purpose. I feel like that's what I'm here for. It doesn't matter whether 10,000 people hear this. It matters that the key people who have the ability to do something about this issue of cancer care can do something. So that's why this is powerful. It's available to anyone. I mean, you want to interview me, don't get me going. I won't shut up.
Well, I talk a lot on this show with my various guests about connection and the importance and the value in that, and how connection opens the door up to relationships, and what the value and the importance in relationships are. So I'm going to come back to a moment where you mentioned, one of the things that motivates you is interviewing people and supporting them and whatnot through all of this new media technology and cross-cultural communications and new media communication, if there's such a term. How do you do this? What do you do with some of them, Phyllis?
Well, strangely enough, not everybody that I think that I want to interview wants to be interviewed. A lot of people have given up, and they're hesitant to talk because their experience has been, number one, in life they've been misquoted or misunderstood, or they don't think it matters because not everybody's listening, or they may have been turned down by a major broadcaster. So a lot of times I have to sort of show people what can happen if even their friends understand what it is they're engaged in thinking about. Mm-hmm. I have to sort of reframe people's understanding of what fame and notoriety really is, more in a sense of teaching them how to empower others to get their work out into the world. So once I get through that part, then I interview people. Now, again, interview is really a strange word because I don't really interview in the typical sense. I really kind of put my quarter in and let them talk. And I work at getting them to say everything they really want to say. So listening is a lot of what I do. That's probably why I'm talking so much now, because usually I don't say much in my interviews. I'm kind of like a rudder. I help people, I guide them where they want to go. And then I show them what they've done, and usually that prompts them to do more or say more. So,
and I'm Phyllis, I'm going to pause us here because we're quickly coming up on another commercial break. If you wouldn't mind just holding that thought, because it's a very important one. I'd like to continue with that stream of thought when we come back. So for our listening audience, 2 minutes worth of commercials. Come back with the engaging Phyllis Haynes, and we'll be learning more about new media and all that you can do with it. Stay with us.
Here's your host, Eric Tonningsen.
Welcome back. My guest on this edition of Awakening to Awareness is Phyllis Haynes, an expert on new media communication, new media technology, and all things inherent within that realm. Just before the break, we were talking about the importance of her interviewing people. And it's not as though she needs to reach the masses that are out there. It's just as important to be able to touch and have a message resonate with a small, focused group of people who can really bring the resources to bear, if you will, or that can impact or move a cause forward. And Phyllis was talking about, I asked the question actually about how does she go about doing this, and she was explaining just before the break how she does it via the interview, but there's a lot of tools and technologies that she can employ. So what I'd like to do, Phyllis, is invite you to come back in here and talk a little bit about, what people can do now to sort of, to broaden their use or their exposure to some of the tools and techniques and applications that are available in the world of new media.
My first rule is to get rid of Woody Allen's rule, and that is make sure that you nurture your friends. So your database is your most important tool. It's not even a matter of technology. If you still have a Rolodex, it's okay. You need to have an accurate, saved area of all of your contacts. And whenever you meet people, put them in your database. I use something called Constant Contact, but there are many things like it. So that's the first thing. Now, the old model of sending information is you have something great to say, and everybody is the receiver. That model is also dead. The second thing I do is make sure that the people in my universe are also supported in getting their words out. So I become a resource and available to helping the people in my database get their word out. And then it becomes a kind of dance, a collective dance that grows exponentially because you are central to their lives and they are central to your lives. Everyone always thinks that it's something out there away from them, but it's actually, you've been given a group of people around you. If you start taking care of your neighborhood, just like in the old days when they said take care of your neighborhood, you will have an extraordinary amount of growth. Now, I use Constant Contact, which is a newsletter service, but I combine that with audio and video, and I don't spam people. You know, I'm not the person who sends you a newsletter every day or every week, sometimes not every month. But when I do send it, it's filled with the lives of other people, people that I work with, things that are going on, and it just grows on its own, Eric. It's amazing. If you help 10 people, each person may represent, let's say, minimally 100 other people. That's a way to get your information out. Also, learn to use subscriptions on YouTube. Google owns YouTube. This is not a small thing. The greatest search engine in the world owns YouTube. You get an automatic free channel just if you have a Gmail address. You don't even have to pay for that. And it's amazing how many people don't take advantage of that. But if you use YouTube, you get your own channel, and then it's your opportunity there to build subscriptions. So I would say to everyone today listening to me, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Phyllis Haynes, and you'll see whatever it is I'm doing, including whatever it is my daughter's doing, because I'm a typical mother. I like to also include the great works of my young daughter, who's a fabulous singer. But that's an aside. I get to plug something, right, Eric?
Yeah.
Anyway, but it's a state of mind. You know, it's letting go of the old model of communication. I'm going to be lecturing. I'm going to be talking in Croatia and trying to get people who are there. This is going to be the Transformational Leadership Council I'll be speaking at in August, actually the end of July. And, you know, I'm going to talk about the new model of communication. The new model might be, except when you're on radio, of course, the new model might be just sitting with someone and letting them see you think. You don't have to stuff people with information. We're all overwhelmed with information. We want to see how the person thinks about something. How did they get to that? Let people see you think. Your media doesn't have to be perfect. You know, when I taught at Emerson College, my students would win awards even though they didn't have the perfect lighting and they didn't have the perfect audio. But what they had was the perfect connection to the subject and to themselves. Let people catch you thinking. You will create attraction. I don't like to talk about the laws of attraction. It's not a law. It's a happening. It's a thing that happens when you are completely yourself. And that's not easy to do. That's actually harder work, and that may be another show. But nonetheless, I use these media to help people access other people and have those people access them. And then sometimes I give them a party so everyone can see. That's also something fun to do. You know how you used to get together and show slides when you took a trip? Now get together and share some video. It's a fun thing to do. I don't know. That's just me, maybe, Eric.
Well, you know, it's...
Want to know more about technology or tools or Google or, you know, make sure that if you have your YouTube channel, you use Facebook, you use Twitter, connect it with the social media that Google is recommending, and it will also grow your channel. They're giving you tools to use. They're actually teaching you. If you don't know how to do something, you go to YouTube. There is a YouTube video to tell you how to do it. And anything you could ask, there's a YouTube video to tell you how to do it. It's amazing. I mean, when I went to school, you had to go to a dusty old library with stacks of books and dig through dusty volumes to find a single morsel of information. You don't have to do that anymore. It's amazing.
I do think I agree with you entirely, and I'm listening to you, and I can actually hear, since we're not face to face, I can hear the energy and the excitement in your voice, especially when you're talking about what you referenced as the new model of communication. And I would just want to add to that, if it's appropriate, that in addition to listening and thinking and watching people as they think, sensing and feeling is such a big part of that as well. And so it's almost like a lost art. A lot of times we just don't engage people in terms of their feelings and their emotions and whatnot. But I'm going to rather than digress, I'm going to bring us back here to new media for a moment, because I mentioned in the opening remarks that most technologies described as new media are digital. So I'm curious, Phyllis, what is it about the digital environment that you love?
First of all, we have to protect it. So what it is I love is very fragile. I love the fact that everything is available on the internet and that nothing is really technically more important than anything else. And that's right now at a risk of changing. So we have to really make sure we fight for net neutrality and keep the internet the way it is. Otherwise, it'll just turn into what we grew up with, which is we'll have major stations and minor stations. So right now, what I love is that anybody can go onto the internet. Now, of course, there are bad people who use the internet. That doesn't mean we should stop the internet. It just means that, look at this. Africa, here's a place that is been so troubled in the world, and roads have never adequately been built throughout, connecting all of the major areas in the way it has been in the United States. But now, Africa has one of the greatest concentrations of cell phones, smartphones in the world, which means all of those people who were disenfranchised 20 years ago are now included in the information that's out there. That's going to grow the economy. That's going to get people to know more and understand more. Sure, there will be people who misuse it. But, I get the Nigerian spam. I see how bad that is. But on the other hand, just think about that kid, that teenager who's so hungry for information. Maybe one kid in the whole village has one phone, but that information is moving out there. That's what I love about it. I don't know. I've gone off the deep end here, but it's. I love that I can sit down and have an idea. I don't know if there's a fun side of me too, Eric. I don't know if I told you I've been working on the subject of vampires. Now here's a everybody has a hobby. I have a fascination with vampire films because I think they're the only place in the universe talking about what's going to happen when we have to live over 150. It's a strange thing. And also vampire films are also dealing with the subject of difference in a way that's not threatening to normal conversation. And so I've been fascinated by it. And I'm working on a film called The Grace, and it's Grace Vampire Trilogy. Hopefully it'll be more than one. But I'm doing this, and I don't have to worry about funding. People are already fascinated by my film. Even Howard Stern's show mentioned my film, and they're saying, well, where is it? It's because you can reach anyone you want. I just feel as if I've been given the keys to the kingdom because I can sit down and think of an idea and make it happen. You'll have to ask me more because otherwise I'll just tell you all the people I've interviewed and all the wonderful subjects out there. So.
Well, when you segued here into vampires, you actually stole a little bit of my thunder because I was going to come back after the commercial break and talk about that. But you mentioned going off the deep end, and it's not off the deep end at all. In fact, many of us are jumping together and enjoying seeing what happens as a result of jumping. There's passion involved in that. So stay with us because we're going to come back and talk with Phyllis Haynes a little bit more about passion and vampires. So we've got 2 minutes of commercial breaks. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Awakening to Awareness show, where transitions meet transformation. Stay tuned as more awareness is created around why it's important for you to plan now so you can comfortably face new challenges, follow your life plan, and respond positively to a life filled with significance, one that you design.
Once more, my engaging guest is Phyllis Haynes, and we're talking about new media and new possibilities. Just before the last commercial break, I asked Phyllis what it was that she loved about the digital environment and whatnot, and she shared some very passionate thoughts and kind of took us into her world of vampires. And there's actually more about Grace, the Vampire Trilogy.com on the Awakening to Awareness show website. So for those of you that are interested in learning more about that, that link is out there. But I wanted to come back in. I'm going to come back to something that we haven't touched on at all real quickly, Phyllis, because I mentioned in your bio in the opening remarks the International Society for Panetics. What is Panetics, and what is it that you're doing with that?
When I was teaching at Emerson College, I ran across the society. It was formed by a man named Ralph Su. Phonetics is a derivation from the Buddhist word for peace. It had to do with a bunch of scientists and scholars sitting around looking for a way to measure decision-making. And they found my views on media to be very helpful to what they were thinking about. The good news is that the work is there. You can find it by searching Panetics. You can run across the Panetics archive. But unfortunately, I was the youngest member of this organization. Most of the members died off. Their hope was that every ethics department would take up the work of the Panetics Society. I keep the archive alive with a website, and it was not a for-profit organization. It was really for people to look at how can we make a decision that doesn't cause a negative decision. For example, a lot of doctors went in a small African village to cure goiter, and they did. And they did operations, and they gave medicine, and everybody got healthy. Well, the village people lived much longer. When that occurred, then people started to starve. So the Panetics Society was looking at how can you make a decision and measure impact in advance, or at least in the process, so that you don't create more suffering out of your so-called good decision-making. And that in itself, Eric, have to be another show.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that small part of it, Phyllis. It's a fascinating world out there, and thank you for being a part of it to the extent that you were. There's come back to new media because I think there's some I'm going to call them contemporary new media communication technologies that you've shared. And there's also a mix in there of mass communication and interpersonal communication. And a lot of this, we've talked about connection, we've talked about the technologies, and we've talked somewhat about the communications facet of all of this. And you mentioned, photo sharing and video sharing and YouTube and social networks and podcasts and whatnot. There's so much that's a part of this, but there's a couple of buzzwords out there that I came across when I was researching before our show that I'd like to ask you to comment on, if there's any significance to it, or how does that sort of tie into the work that you're doing. And one of it is digital storytelling, and the other one is rich media. Any thoughts on either of those?
I don't have any thoughts on rich media. I've heard the term. Digital storytelling is what I do, and there are all kinds of ways to do it. Some with music, with video, with storybooks, with storylines. But your question reminds me of something that I left out that is very important. There is a video online today called The Internet's Own Boy. It's about a guy named Aaron Swartz who killed himself, a young man in his mid-20s. And he was one of the creators of Reddit and really one of the thinkers about how to use the Internet for social good. He believed that scientific journals shouldn't be owned by anybody, but that they should all be free. He really was interested in information being free. Now, unfortunately, he got charged criminally when all of the serious hackers started getting in the way of things. And he was never one of those. He was always interested in what MIT, for example, where he worked, was interested in, which was making sure that scientific information that empowers people, would be available. So I think it's very important that we all see this film, The Internet's Own Boy. And there's a professor, Lawrence Lessig, at Harvard, who was also promoting this and who was his mentor. And it sounds like it's a small thing that I'm speaking about, but in that, you will hear the most important arguments about why we have to protect this Internet and what it's doing for humankind. And just looking at this video will take you out of your comfort zone and have you go out and start using the Internet to help others. And by sharing information, by sharing what you know, by making sure people have access, helping older people who may not know how to use it. This is something that's been given to us that's very special. So digital storytelling, that's my story that I'm telling.
Mm-hmm.
Is really, I'm telling the story of people that you need to know about these people. Now, Aaron Swartz is not my colleague, nor did I have the privilege of knowing him. I was at the Aspen Institute, and I heard a lecture by the filmmaker and by Dr. Lessig, and realized that he was a young man who could have had billions of dollars. He would have been another Facebook billionaire, but he didn't want that. What he wanted was to make sure that the Internet was used to raise people up, to have poor people who didn't know things. And that was his motivation. And he was hounded because he was misunderstood as a hacker, which he was not. But I really, if I could give anybody anything today, it's nice that you want to know about me, and I think it's great, and I hope that I will have more followers or people who read about Grace. But really, if everyone goes to look at The Internet's Own Boy, it's right on YouTube. It's free. And I will, if you go to my channel, you can tell me what you think about that film, and I will look at what you write about it. It's really worth the time. Maybe Lawrence Lessig will come and talk to you, Eric.
Well, it could be, but I'd like to reinforce for the listening audience what you just shared, Phyllis, because you mentioned that what it's the Internet and what it's doing for humankind, and that's just think about the vastness. And I talk a lot on this show and in my blog about significance and doing good things that are significant, not necessarily for your own agenda, but for the benefit of others. And you mentioned helping others, and if people don't take advantage, and especially for the boomers and even members of the silent generation, if they don't take advantage of this, what's available to them today in terms of communication technologies, it's because it's free, it's easily accessible, and it really comes back full circle to sort of what I see as the core of not only your work, Phyllis, but what we're talking about, and that is communicating with one another and connecting. And the wherewithal that we have at our disposal today is like it's never been before. So why aren't we taking advantage of it? And that's really just a rhetorical question. But I do want to mention that you had briefly said that you're going to Croatia at the end of this month to speak to the Transformation Leadership Council at their conference. And I believe the title of your presentation at that conference is the Transformational Interview. What is that?
Well, that's where we started our conversation. That is to get people out of the habit of thinking that if the microphone is in front of you, that it's your job to stuff a lot of information. It's the old academic model that we need to get rid of. You don't have to do that because the academic information is available. What you have to do is give people access to you from a spiritual place. You need to be present and allow yourself to be in a conversation that ignites the other person's inside. And you do that by being available. It's hard to demonstrate this. If you could see my face, you would understand that the transformational interview is the chance for people to catch you thinking. And when they do that, it will trigger something in them to think about their own ideas. It's a tool. It's a powerful tool. And a few people I've interviewed have it naturally. Some people come to it by practicing. If you listen to Terry Gross on NPR radio, she's a transformational interviewer. She's rarely caught up with looking good in her interview. She is really focused on getting inside the other person. Charlie Rose is that sometimes.
And being fully present with that individual, I'm sure. And we're coming up on the close of the show, Phyllis. We've got about 90 seconds. Would you please take that time to share with the listening audience how they can get in touch with you and find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
I thank you for that offer. I have a number of things that are important. I'll just give you a couple of things and how you can get in touch with me. I am easiest to reach through YouTube. And if you subscribe to my channel, you'll get private videos that not everyone gets to see. And these videos are usually either interviews or some production that I'm working on. I will answer all questions that come.
And Phyllis, we got about 20 seconds.
Then I want to tell you I love you, Eric, and I love what you're doing. And I thank you for the privilege of airtime, which is a gift.
Well, you know, the privilege was really mine and that of my listening audience, Phyllis. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us and to share with us. We appreciate it.